Hey guys, Gregory and Claire Bass with Removing the Rust. Super excited to be here with you tonight. Again, we are operating off a AT&T hotspot, so AT&T probably should start throwing some dimes our way to give them so much props every time. Or hashtag thanks for nothing setting link, right? We can do that too. So if you are joining us, which we see that some of you are, thank you for being here tonight. We are super excited about tonight's topic. One, because I think there's just this idea out there that whenever you hear LGBT, that they think that the church is completely against the people in that who identify in that. And so I'm super excited to talk to the guest that we have tonight. We'll talk about him in a moment. But Facebook is awesome. And, it's not so awesome at times. But this is why it's awesome, because you can connect with some really great people just by stalking them, which is what I end up doing most often. So our guest tonight is yet again another, just like Father Brian Harrington that I brought on previously. Found him on Facebook, saw his content was great. And, hey, let's bring him on. Let's talk to him. And he was awesome. And he was also the winner of Catholic Jeopardy last week, which indeed. Thank you for watching Catholic Jeopardy if you did that. And for your donations. It's fantastic. Over $1,600 was donated to the churches of Cameron and Creole, which is huge, especially after Hurricane Laura. So I do want to let you know that if you're seeing my face as being really red, nothing's wrong with your computer. I worked outside all day yesterday with the Houston Rockets in their nonprofit division, helping to give out items to the public and to our team. So that was all day, and I didn't realize that I was sunburnt until the end of the day. So yeah, a little painful, a little red. Just say I'm blushing. Okay. Are you ready for tonight?
I am.
What are we talking about?
LGBT.
Yes, what the Catholic Church teaches about LGBT. Again, we're kind of void of, the full understanding of what the church teaches, which is why we bring on experts. Yes, that's what we do at Removing the Rust. When we talk about potential topics, it's not a debate. It's not information that we're sharing because we have an agenda. This show is all about teaching what the Catholic Church teaches. Nothing more. No feelings. Set up that all aside. This is what the church says and teaches. And so that's what we're going to share. And now it's time to bring on our guest expert, which, again, I thought I had a radio voice. This guest definitely has a radio voice, and I'm a bit envious, actually. Can you be envious of a priest? I think you can.
I mean, you can, but should you be?
He's laughing at me back there, so that's good. Everybody, allow me to introduce you to Father Alexander Albert. How are you, Father?
Hello. Doing very well.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining Removing the Rust, specifically to talk about such a hot topic, right? LGBT.
Right, yeah.
But before we get started, I always kind of like to talk to our priests and say, why did you become a priest? I quickly shared that I was glancing through your Facebook and noticed that you had a rather long ponytail back in the day. And to flash forward to now and see that you became a priest, I am intrigued at that story. You mind sharing with us?
Sure. I mean, I was born and raised Catholic, but I didn't feel the call to the priesthood explicitly until sophomore year of college. Like born and raised Catholic, went to Catholic school for middle and high school. Took the faith seriously. We went to mass. We weren't the most devout. We didn't pray at home, but always had this sense in the back of my mind that there was a purpose, something I needed to do. And it involved helping people. And so I was always kind of looking career-wise, what's that going to be? Went to college, was majoring in education, kind of drifted from the practice of the faith. I don't know that I ever lost the belief, but I certainly lost the habit of it. And then had a bit of a conversion, rough breakup, and then returned to confession. And when, cleared away the obstacles of sin, clear as day for me was this call. I'm supposed to be a priest. It was surprising, how clear it was at the time. Took a little bit more time in college, spent 2 more years sort of sorting through some of the human mess of bad relationships and, life of sin, all that stuff. And the call didn't go away. It just sort of stayed there in the back of my mind. and I like to describe it like falling in love, where like there's a person, like you notice a person and they stand out, and they become a part of like just the background of your thinking. You just find yourself drifting to them in the thoughts, and it kind of grows. And in sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not, but you just find that like for whatever reason, there's this growing interest in this person, and that time spent with that person becomes something that you like look forward to. You want, and so like this call, despite the sort of I kind of want to be married and have kids, was just not going away.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I mean, it basically boiled down to Father Chester looking at me and going, "You got nothing to lose. Just go to seminary." And I went, "Okay." And when I got to seminary, I knew. I was like, "Okay, this is where I'm supposed to be." And then it kind of just carried me through.
That is
Here I am,
awesome.
priest.
Yeah.
That's definitely awesome. Yeah,
It's really beautiful.
kind of felt like the story here. You know, it's a deepen our relationship. We're growing and everything. I just love to hear those stories of how, because your life is such a life of service, right? Not to mention, we had a show recently, 2 or 3 episodes back. I think it was 2 episodes back, becoming a priest, right? So all the stuff that you guys do to get to the point of where you are. So how long have you been in the priesthood?
Just finished 4 years. Yeah.
Very nice.
In June.
So let me ask, what is like the probationary period or the newbie period for a priest? I'm assuming that's a thing.
I think 5 years
Okay.
is a lot of, or like, I know that 7 is a big marker statistically for like leaving the priesthood.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think like after 5 years, you kind of lose the new priest smell. Really, it's even just 2 years. Like, you know, as soon as another ordination happens, a couple of ordinations happen, and it's like people forget about like, oh, he's the new priest. Yeah, he's been a priest for a while. You know, they just
Nice.
and then really, like, and it depends on each diocese, like how long it takes. But when you become a pastor, it's kind of like, all right, you know, you're a priest and you're doing your thing, and
no more parochial vicar. Now you're a pastor.
Oh man, talk about that's the life. Parochial vicar, man, that's the way to be.
I imagine that it also depends on how many new priests that you have.
Yes, yeah, it depends on the number of parishes, the number of priests you've got. You know, some dioceses like Charles are real small and have you know only need a few vocations to staff their parishes. Some of us have a lot more parishes to deal with, so it's it becomes a balancing act. And like they want to give you some experience as a parochial vicar, but they also got to fill the spot. You know.
I love how you said Lake Charles. We just had our Catholic Jeopardy last week, and we ended up having Father Brian Harrington from Lafayette participate. He won. Of course, and he donated his winnings to. He said, "Of course." So the whole reason that I'm sharing this is because the next campaign that we have is going to be called Holy Trivia, and basically it's going to be a group of priests from Lafayette versus a group of priests from Lake Charles, because y'all kind of have like this friendly, competitive nature about you all. So we're super excited about that. And we can already tell that you should be on the Lafayette team, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Putting that out there. Because Father Vadrine's going to be on it. And you talked about Father Vadrine earlier, you know?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so again, the show is, you know, it's going to be fantastic tonight. We're talking about what the Catholic Church teaches about LGBT. We're going to give you the floor here soon, but, you know, our viewers come from all different religions. I mean, we have some people that don't really identify. We have Catholics who watch. We have Baptists who watch. People who just, the show was all about learning what the Catholic Church teaches instead of going off of what you thought you heard. And we do that by educating people through experts in Catholicism. So thank you for being here tonight, okay?
Oh, sure.
And to make sure that that what we talk about is of God, we'd like you to lead us in prayer, please.
Sure thing. Let's begin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, as you made the human heart to long for you, the human mind to seek out truth, we ask you to fill both with your Holy Spirit, that we may be truly open to the truth you have proclaimed, and that we may be willing to receive and live in accord with that truth, not out of fear, but out of love and out of a desire of the great freedom that only truth can bring. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Thank you. Miss Colleen saying she already can't wait for the next game night. So, you know, she's ready. Oh, and she's from Lake Charles. So yeah, whew. We got to make sure we have a lot of people campaigning, especially to bring it home in Lake Charles.
Choose your warriors wisely.
Right. Well, you know, I'd like to start this discussion with one thing. The more that I have grown in my faith and also learned of my faith, like the truth of it, right? To be able to truly see what people are saying, if it's true or false, based off of what the church teaches, right? Removing all personal opinion. This is what the church teaches, and it's been passed down from Jesus and God. And so I've realized that when you talk about the truth, people are quick to say that you're judging them. And hey, Jerry, how you doing? I'm so glad Jerry made it, because this show is all like, Jerry asked me a question long ago in the beginning of the show. And so now, Jerry, your question is going to be answered here. So go ahead, and I'm glad you made it. Listen in. But, you know, when you share the truth with people, I've been told that I'm judging so quick just by sharing the truth of the church. And so I'm looking forward to you to share the truth with us, so I can see if I'm correct. And also you can tell me really how that transitions from truth, and then how can we share that message without being misconstrued, of being judged, or that word judging, you know? Mm-hmm. So we'll give you the floor, Father Albert.
Sure. Yeah, it is it's a complicated topic. And I mean, you'll hear that's a recurring theme. But when we're dealing with this, there's a lot of complication. There's a lot of nuance. And so sorting through that requires a lot of goodwill and a lot of patience for both sides, because there is so much involved, so much at play. Particularly when it comes to proclaiming the truth and not coming off as judging, there has to be a recognition on both sides that there are different starting points, different sort of frames of reference. And all of us instinctively have, implications and connections that we draw when we hear and experience things. And our life experience colors that. And so without even realizing it, we hear a comment, a statement, an assertion. And in the back of our mind, automatically, there are connections to if that's true, this means this, and this for me. And sometimes at the level of consciousness, what happens is we don't see all those connections happening in the background. What we see is that final conclusion, this means this about me. Therefore, this person's judging me by asserting this truth that has all these hidden connections that I'm only subconsciously aware of. All that's to say is you gotta be patient. And you got to be willing to make distinctions, and you got to be willing to give and take with terminology and all of that frame of reference. And yeah, it does help to have an established relationship, a friendship, a history of proving that you care for the person you're interacting with, so that when you tell them a truth that sets off these alarm bells, they have a counteract that says, yeah, but I know this person cares. Yeah. And we can fall into two extremes when it comes to approaching this issue particularly. There is the overemphasis on this is the revealed truth that I would live and die for. And that is true. But then there is that this person needs to know that they are loved by me and by the church. But we can get into the point of so I won't say this truth at all. Yeah. Because I want them to know that they're loved. And so it's how do we do this? How do we connect truth and love? And it's got to be in the context of personal relationship, and it takes this patience, and it takes admitting from the outset, I don't know everything. I don't know their experience. And it's very possible and likely that they see things I do not. And I want to see that with them, and I want to help them see what I see. And then, at the end of the day, if we believe Jesus Christ is the truth, then all we want is for them to look for the truth and us to look for the truth, and we'll get together at some point. We'll connect.
Yeah. So
all that's by way of preface. As what I'm going to present is same-sex attraction and transgenderism specifically. There's a lot of letters on the acronym now. I don't know all of them. I can't say that I've kept up with all of the different cultural modulations, but
they even added
or in order to add to this, in order to approach this, I want to just lay out the goals. The goals is, what is the church's teaching on this issue, and how do we live it out and stand by it? In order to do that, to what is the teaching? We have to begin with setting the groundwork of like, what is the church's perspective? How does the church see reality? Because Catholicism sees reality in a very different way than most people in Western culture. We have some common ground, but not a lot. And the biggest part of that has to do with creation and original sin. When it comes to questions like this and human beings, people instinctively look to experience, to what is there, to themselves, what do I experience interiorly, what I see around me, and they try to draw conclusions from that. And that's not, I mean, that's part of human discovery. But this does not always provide direction on what should be. And the reason the church claims to have the answers is not that we're the better scientists or the better sociologists, but that we claim that the guy who designed it told us how he designed it. And almost all of the misunderstandings I see in communicating between the church and the movement behind LGBTQ, et cetera, comes down to this like forgetting about the fall, about original sin, about the design of creation, that things that exist have a purpose, and we need to know that purpose in order to use them in that way. So the church claims to say this is the design of the creator. And when we convey this, we want to be able to convey the dynamic that God created the world, but that the world is fallen and broken, and that brokenness explains most of what people who experience these difficulties are dealing with. So let's start with Genesis. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. This is the first mention of creation of humanity, and it's explicit from the very beginning, male and female. No inequality, no antagonism, no mixture. And that both of them are in the image of God, and they together are part of that image. The next chapter, 2:24-25, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed, right? This is the statement of human sexuality. One flesh for man and woman. This is the design that God has. Naked and not ashamed. The Catholic Church believes the human body is a good thing, and that human sexuality is a good thing. But then, I mean, the immediate concern is, well, then why do I feel these desires to do this? If you're telling me it's wrong, why do I feel it? Well, this is the answer. Genesis 3, the fall. Right. We hear, and actually in the book of wisdom, God formed us to be imperishable, the image of his own nature. But by the envy of the devil, death entered the world. Right. The Catechism tells us the church has always taught that the overwhelming misery which oppresses men and their inclination towards evil and death cannot be understood apart from their connection with Adam's sin and the fact that he has transmitted to us a sin with which we are all born and afflicted. So all of the arguments, all of the appeals to nature, to science, to desire, all of them have to wrestle with, is this part of the original design, or is this a result of the fall? And depending on how I answer that question is, okay, how do I interpret and respond to this desire, to this biological reality, to this experience? And as Catholics, we say that original sin had certain effects, right? When Adam and Eve sinned, they lost the grace that made them immortal. They lost being aligned with God's will, and they had certain consequences. We list the four primarily as death, we're going to die. Darkened intellect, our minds are not as sharp as they could be. We have difficulty finding the truth. That's pretty obvious. You can look around the world. It's hard for us to get to the truth. Weakened will. Even when we know what is right, it's a struggle for us to make the right decision. And connected to that, the fourth one, concupiscence, the desire to do what is evil, or to not do what is good. But for the purpose of this topic, it's crucial that we explain that all of decay, all of deformity, all of disease, all of psychological, physical disorder is a result of the fall. It's that manifestation of death in various ways. So genetic diseases, cancer, mental disorders, mutations are because of original sin. Why does a child get brain cancer? How can God do that? That was not God's design. That was not his intent. He's allowing it, yes. But that only happens because of original sin broke the ordering of the world. And God allows that because he has a plan to redeem it. When we're talking about what is the church teaching, we're dealing with what is the creation, what is the fall, and how does God redeem it? And so we keep coming back to this. What is the fall? And so the trick, of course, for us after the fall is to sort out what belongs to original sin, what belongs to human nature, to the design of nature, or rather that God's design. We don't want to confuse nature with like, oh, monkeys do it, it's natural. That's not what we mean by human nature. We mean by like, what is the design? What is how are human beings meant to function? And so how do I sort out what is part of God's original design for that? And what is the result of fall messing up God's design? And it's the same way you would figure out, like, if you're dealing with your computer and like it's doing things, you're like, it's not supposed to, why is it, is that the original programming or is that a bug? Well, how do I know? Well, the best way is to ask the guy who built the computer or designed the software. He's like, no, it's not supposed to do that. Oh, it is supposed to do that. And this is why. Like, you talk to the designer. So we're going to talk to the designer. And it is true. Human beings can figure out the natural design to an extent. We call that natural law. But as Catholics, we have the from the source revelation. So let's talk about the effects of the fall on sexual attraction in general. Scripture makes it immediately obvious that the relationship between the sexes is impacted. We're afraid because we're naked, right? That's the shame of being naked. One of the punishments that God lists, or rather the consequences God lists for sin on sex is, right, he says to the woman, right, your urge will be for your husband and he will rule over you. And he tells the man, right, that you will toil and the earth will resist your desire to bear fruit. And so there's a lot to unpack with there, but basically what we're seeing is like there is these disorders that enter into sexual desire that becomes competition, that becomes perversion, that becomes using the other rather than loving the other. And we can say any sexual desire that is detached from the union of spouses and the procreation of children is disordered. That was the original design before the fall, and that's still there after the fall, but now we've injected all these twists and competitions and conflicts and lack of clarity. And just as it's possible for a human being to be born with a missing or deformed limb, right? If somebody's born without an arm, we don't say God doesn't want him to have an arm. We say like original sin messed up the biological process and he was born without an arm. It does not degrade his human dignity in any way whatsoever. And he should receive no less love and is no less capable of being the human being God designed him to be. But the consequence of the fall for him is the deformed arm. Well, the same thing is possible with sexual desire, with psychological function. There are deformities that enter into the psychological reality as well as the physical. Deformity is not a moral quality. Deformity is not a moral quality. And this is the thing that never seems to get into the public perception of the church's teaching, is that when we say something is disordered or deformed, it doesn't imply a moral judgment on the one who has the deformity or the disorder. Yeah. Right? Having depression says nothing about your moral character. Missing an arm says nothing about your moral character. Experiencing the homicidal desire does not immediately speak to your moral character, right? Having homosexual desire does not speak to your moral character. Feeling the desire to be a woman when you're physically a man does not speak to your moral character, not necessarily, right? And so like when we get to, well, this is wrong and here's why, it's not to say like this automatically makes you evil. And so I want to kind of address one of the arguments put forward by the world in response to like the nature argument. Okay, we're talking about human nature. This is how it's meant to be. people are like, okay, is it, I'm born this way. I'm born this way. Okay. Well, let's talk about born this way. The genetic argument, like, is it genetic? Is being homosexual genetic? Is being transgender genetic? Well, there's two problems with it. First is that the study last year that came out last year basically proves there is no gay gene. There is no gay gene. They identified a lot of different genes that are connected with sexual behavior, and they found 5 genetic markers that tend to appear in those who have same-sex attraction. But those 5 genetic markers explain about 1% of the differences of sexual activity. So, I mean, when you look at that mathematically and statistically, it's a very minimal impact. It's just like these 5 tend to appear together with people with same-sex attraction, but having these 5 doesn't make someone gay, because there's plenty of people who have it and do not have those desires.
Okay.
So, and this, I mean, that's the science. You can find that article if you just look up the study. I mean, I found it on, I think, nature.com. Yeah. So there is no gay gene. I mean, there's also the studies before that looked at twins where one has same-sex attraction and the other doesn't, and they're genetically the same. So it doesn't seem to be a genetic thing. There is the burgeoning field of epigenetics, which is very new. It's the idea of like people have genes, but there's also the layer of like factors that cause genes to be expressed. And there might be something in epigenetics that has something to do with the manifestation of same-sex attraction, but it's still too new and there's not enough research in that field. And I mean, they're still trying to figure out even like, what does all that mean? How much does epigenetics affect what is passed on to the next generation? But yeah, there's a layer between the experience growing up and your genetic predisposition called epigenetics, which is the way that you grow up affects which genes activate and which ones don't. And so, and I'll leave that to scientists who know much more about epigenetics than I do. But the Catechism puts it this way. It's very simple, succinct. The psychological genesis of homosexuality remains largely unexplained. The church is saying, we don't know. We don't know what causes psychologically for someone to experience this desire. And it is important to, again, validate the experience of other people. There are people, and plenty of them, who experience same-sex attraction from such an early age that they cannot at all distinguish it from any other of their natural genetic dispositions. They grew up with it. They always felt that way. As soon as they could remember, or as soon as they experienced these sexual desires, it was always ordered towards the same sex. And so like they can't identify an experience or a choice or anything. That they're like, as far as they knew, it just manifested naturally at the age when it should have manifested in another direction, right? According to the design we're saying is God's.
Right.
And so you have to validate that. And a lot of the church gets a lot of flack for saying, oh, they choose it. No, we don't say that. The church has never said people choose to experience same-sex attraction. They feel like they were born with it because as long as they can remember, that's what's there. What we're saying is it wasn't genetic, but something in either the epigenetics or their upbringing, but we don't know. And there's always some mystery when you talk about the human person and the interior thing. The second problem with the genetic argument is that even if there was a gene, it wouldn't prove anything.
You know, that's
even if they found it.
Because I remember the argument that, you know, they weren't born this way and all this other stuff. You're not born this way. And so the fact that people, when they get to the age of development to where they can start to have feelings or emotions towards someone else, it's interesting to hear that. I'd never heard of epigenetics. I definitely will look it up and read that article. But it still remains true that, so this is what science is trying to prove it, and the church is still saying, you know, this, we don't know what caused it besides original sin.
Mm-hmm. Right. We'll give the theological answer, which is the fall of man caused disorder in the nature of the world and the nature of man. Okay. Because we know that the original design of man is male and female, united in lifelong union, open to life. We know that anything outside of that design is disordered. We don't know how each of those individual disorders is explained. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And here's why, like, even if they could find a gay gene, like a single gene that was like, every gay person has it. If you have it, you're gay. If you don't have it, you're not. Like, even if they found that, which they'll never will, it can't happen. Even if they did, it wouldn't prove anything because genes guide our biological development. They still do not determine what a human person ought to do. Right? That's what is. Your genes do this. But those genes doing that do not say, then you therefore should continue to act in this way.
Right.
Genetic predisposition for obesity or alcoholism does not make drunkenness okay. It does not make overeating okay. Gluttony. Gluttony is still a sin, even if you're genetically predisposed to have a harder time controlling your desire to eat. Now, having that genetic predisposition doesn't make you a worse person. It just means that you have to fight harder against this particular desire because of your genetics. And again, like, those genetics themselves are not functioning to the ideal because of original sin, because of the fall of man. The genetic predisposition for cancer and a whole host of diseases don't prove that God wanted you to have cancer. They just prove that cancer is a result of the fall. And I mean, the fall is it affects our genetics. And so, like, genetic factors may very well contribute to the occurrence of same-sex attraction. There may be predispositions, and epigenetics may explore some of that. But that doesn't make same-sex attraction any more natural as in being in accord with the design that God has for human nature. And so, it's being able to make that distinction, right? This is the reality. I feel, experience these things. My body and mind work this way. Therefore, I should follow them. Well, no, not necessarily. Because original sin, because concupiscence. Concupiscence is the desire to act against God's will. The inclination to evil. And yeah, it has genetic factors too, but like, that's, again, genetics don't prove anything except this is how the body is working. It does not determine this is how human beings should behave.
Right. It's not controlling you in the sense. You still have
exactly.
will.
We're not controlled by our genes.
Right.
We are not. And I mean, while like they are clearly a key part of who we are, like they affect a whole lot, they do not ultimately define our identity. Our identity is ultimately defined by relationship with God.
Right.
The good news is that in heaven, when we're resurrected, our bodies will be perfect and all genetic faults will go away. All desires for evil will go away. All of that will be gone. The bodies will be as they were meant to be and better. So, I mean, so this is the Catechism statement on homosexuality. The number of men and women who have these tendencies is not negligible. There's plenty of people who experience this. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, sensitivity. Unjust discrimination should be avoided. They're called to fulfill God's will, to unite their sacrifice to the Lord's cross. When we say the desire is objectively disordered, we're talking about the desire, not the person. My desire to play 14 hours of Fortnite, I don't have that desire anymore. But that my desire to eat 3 cartons of ice cream is disordered, right? My desire to have sex outside of marriage, in a certain sense, is disordered. We all experience disordered desires. Some are more obviously so than others. Some are an extreme of a good desire, and some are a desire that just went the wrong direction. The fact that the desire is there does not say you are evil or you are good. Some people, it's easier for them to be nice. They're just naturally more nice. It actually is less credit to them when it's easy for them to be nice. Like, if you're genetically predisposed to be pleasant and get along with people, like, it's not a big deal that you're pleasant. You're just kind of going along with it. It doesn't prove that you're a good person just because it's easy for you to keep your patience. If you've built the virtue and you've made the choice, even against your inclination, to do the right thing, that means something, right? And it's not a virtue for someone who's not attracted to the same sex to not do things with the same sex. They don't even have the desire to do it. Like, of course you didn't do it. But it means a lot when somebody who has same-sex attraction says, no, I'm going to act in accord with God's design and not this desire, fallen. That's a virtue. That can be a holy act, a sacrifice to God. And that's what the Catechism. the point saying it's objectively disordered is only to say, because you can be given the grace to overcome it anyway. You are not defined by it, even though it's deeply impactful and it affects all of your personality. It does not define your personality. It does not control you. It does not make you evil.
Absolutely. Yeah. You still have all your gifts that God has given you.
Right. And I'll say this here, like I do know people who have same-sex attraction who like couldn't even dream of being sexually involved with the sex, who live chaste lives, who love the Catholic Church and her teaching on this. It's hard. They struggle with lust like anybody does.
Absolutely.
But they, with the help of grace, resist it and love the truth despite the challenge. I mean, you know, any guy can tell you it's a lifelong battle to live chastely, even when you're married to a beautiful woman. Like you still have to struggle to live chastely.
Absolutely.
And so what should be commended is the choice to follow what is right, not just what you feel. And so, yeah, there are a lot of people in the culture who like make themselves out to be better. It's like, I'm not attracted to other dudes, and that one is, so I'm better than him. No, you're not.
No.
Like you lie, cheat, and steal. Like, you know, you have sex outside of marriage. That's a mortal sin too. Like,
Absolutely.
even if it's with a woman, like it doesn't
live with them
really
outside of marriage. Yeah. Yeah.
Both of them are against God's law. I mean, it's like, so, you know, I can't stress this enough. When we say the desire is disordered, we do not mean the person is the problem. We mean we are on the side of the person against their own desire. The church is always on the side of the soul against its own inclinations. The church is on your side against your laziness. The church is on your side against your lust. And so like it's how do we convey that, like, I'm your ally against your own worst tendencies, rather than your tendencies make you my enemy, which is unfortunately how it comes across.
Yeah, I think, you know, we talk about, because the way that I see it, if you share this information, you share this truth, you know, you do it with love. But then the individuals on the other side, and I'm not talking politics, but on the other side of this conversation, they tend to identify love as just being love. Let them be them, and that is love, right? And you kind of touched on this in the very beginning of the talk, basically saying that, you know, you don't want to upset people, therefore you end up saying nothing. And of course, yes, I'm not going to just walk up to anybody, especially people I don't know, and try to share this information, right? You just don't do that, because then, yeah, it's who are you and why do you think you can tell me this type of stuff? But then also those that you're close with and that you can have these conversations with, to know that it's a safe place and you can have the discussion, but also at the same time, know that it's coming from love, and not the love that I'm judging you and what you're doing is wrong. Because I've done the same thing with, you know, family, like you said, who were living together. Shoot, I mean, yeah, family who were living together before they got married and all these other experiences. And not to mention, people have come to me and said, hey, you're messing up. And I'm like, yeah, shut up. I know. You know, we all go through those pieces. And I definitely had my share. It's not easy to hear it, one, especially when you know you're in the wrong, right? Specifically with what the church teaches, right? So I just wanted to reaffirm kind of what you said there, but also at the same time know that it's a difficult conversation. And it's also, if you have these tendencies, the life of service, you said that you know some people and, you know, they teach about this, you said?
Oh, they live it. No, yeah, they generally don't teach it, but like they will defend it. Like they'll tell you, like, yeah, I lived the gay lifestyle and now I don't. And because I've come to see the truth in this way. And you know, like they still struggle, like, because they grew up in a certain era in America where it was this, like, you're gay, that means you're a moral ingrate. Well, no, like, you have same-sex attraction, again, doesn't have to define you. And like they still struggle with some of those self-image issues, but then they also like appreciate that the church equips them to like distinguish, like, I'm not defined by this desire. And some of the happy times in my life had nothing to do with this sexual desire. And I find happiness living chastely, not having sexual interaction with anyone, and learning to control these desires and seeing to define myself as something much more than this urge.
Yeah. Now, my understanding is someone with that urge, it's not wrong to live with another person, right? Even if they are of the same sex and of that orientation, right? What's wrong is what could become of that close partnership, right? So in a sense, you can't judge and say they're doing wrong by living together.
Yeah, we have to be, again, that's when you start getting into judgments, it gets really tricky. And I do want to say this, and maybe I should have laid this foundation first, is that the Catholic Church also believes that love and happiness are possible without genital sexual expression. So again, in the background of the mind of somebody who's, you're telling them, okay, same-sex activity is wrong and is against the design of the human person. They hear you can't be happy and love someone. And honestly, if you tell someone they can't be happy and they can't love, I'm going to agree. You're wrong. You can't tell people that. That's terrible. You can't tell a human being he has no right to be happy. He has no right to love. Absolutely, a human being has a right to love and is destined for happiness. We desire the happiness of everyone. That's what heaven's supposed to be. It's not, angels on clouds playing harps. It's happiness. Now, we're really bad at defining happiness, and that's where the problem comes in.
Right.
Love doesn't have to be sexual, right? Love takes many, many different forms, and one of them, a very powerful form, is the sexual union of man and woman. But you know what? As powerful and as important that love is, that one goes away. In heaven, no one, there's no marriage.
Yeah.
There's no procreation, right? What we're saying is it's possible for you to have love, to love someone, and to be, in a intimate friendship with another man, or in the case with another woman. And more often than not, that, because I was going to say this to the end of the talk, but I think it's better to address it now, is like the answer of redemption is to proclaim that you're called to be happy and your happiness does not depend on sexual union with another person of the same sex. You are called to love and have important, intimate friendships that do not have to be sexual. And the most successful apostolate to men and women of same-sex attraction is the Courage Apostolate, and it's built around a friendship model of finding people who have similar struggles and forming those intimate friendships. Yes, there are temptations. There are concerns, like, if they form intimate friendships, are they tempted to engage in these sexual behaviors? I'm sure they are. But, that doesn't mean it's impossible for them to be friends. Yeah. They have to be prudent about that. There has to be certain guards in place, but with the help of grace, with accountability, it's absolutely possible and really necessary for them to have deep, intimate friendships with people that where they feel a deep personal human connection that doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be called marriage. And that it can be a part of their happiness. It's about that human connection. So absolutely, the church desires that all people have deep, intimate friendships, that they are loved and appreciated, that they are accepted, and that they know what this love and this happiness means. And just to be clear, love defined by the church is to will the good of another, right? It's not a feeling. Feelings are tied to it. Love is not a feeling. Anybody who's married for more than 10 years or more than 2 years gets it. Love is at work.
2 months.
Yeah. Love is work. It is a decision. It is a process. It is a habit. It is not a feeling. And so
you said it perfectly. You definitely had the words that I was looking for. So thank you for that. And I agree. Yeah. 10 years of marriage now. Well, actually, shoot, coming up on 11. My
man, awesome.
It's past.
Yeah. And so I want to say this very clearly for anybody who has same-sex attraction, and we'll get to gender dysphoria in a second, who thinks that maybe they're the wrong, gender, the wrong sex, whatever. You're a human being who deserves to be loved, and you're called to be happy, and I want you to be happy. And the church only teaches this because, we claim that, God revealed to us, this is the design for human happiness. The design for human 30 years. Congrats. This is designed for human happiness, and that happiness does not guarantee there'll be no suffering. There's plenty of suffering in real happiness. It does not mean that you will not have to do hard things and deny yourself. But that, I mean, as we pass through the cross, we come to the resurrection. And that's where real happiness is found. And it's done in all these little ways. And that's what the Catechism is saying. They unite the sacrifice to the cross. I mean, and just like all the celibate men and women, right, priests and religious around the world who have sex with nobody, who live happy, fulfilled lives. And I appreciate that, like, it's a little different because I chose to be celibate. I wasn't born with the inability to experience this because I'm not attracted. I chose to be celibate. But
I mean, I imagine some priests have dealt with both of those.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, there are plenty of priests who have same-sex attraction. And you'll find them all over the spectrum about where they stand on what the church is teaching on that is.
Right.
But I mean, at the end of the day, chastity is possible and happiness is found in chastity. And if someone hears that and have trouble believing it, like, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't really blame you. It hasn't come across in the way that it's been proposed in the culture. But I really don't intend any hatred, and we really do believe this is what's best. And so that redemption is, again, it's that patience, it's that intimate friendship. It is making the distinction between I feel this way and I should act this way, right? Those two things are not the same thing.
Right.
So,
and you're not shunning people because of, their sin versus your sin. It's not like. So let me ask you this: somebody actually,
I sin better than you, right? That's at the end of the day. I sin better than you.
That's a good way of saying that. And so I know that there is a seriousness of sin, right? And that some sins, obviously mortal sins, are greater than venial sins. Is there a spectrum for, like, this is the worst sin ever, and then it goes down, right?
There is.
Okay.
I mean, there's proportionality in all of this, right? There are some evils that are more evil. Like not every mortal sin is on the same level. Now, every mortal sin will send you to hell. So, like, for practical purposes, they're kind of the same, but there are sins that are. But here's the thing: the greatest sin is not sexual. The greatest sin is blasphemy. It is the direct repudiation of God. It is hatred of God. Right. And so, I mean, sexual sins are the most popular.
Right.
But they're not the worst. And it's, it's more often not helpful to get into the distinctions of ranking kinds of sexual sin, of which is worse than the other. Correct. That does not work on a public scale. Like, there are times in individual conversation when people are trying to sort through and work through, breaking habits and such, where you can lay out some of those scales, but it's not helpful for someone to stand up in a pulpit and say this sexual sin is worse than that sexual sin when they're both mortal. It's better to emphasize, like, we're in it together, fighting against mortal sin. Exactly.
Well, that's my point, because, and that's what we're all doing, because we all struggle with our own mortal sins, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no whoever's sin, regardless. Let me say it in the way of this: if you are working at your sin, let's say it that way. If you were working to overcome that sin, then that's different, right? Versus someone who is living it out, and it's not focused on overcoming.
Well, that's when it just seems to come up. That's when the pride term seems relevant to bring up, that we're proud about.
No,
right. Yeah. And this is where we get into the debate within leadership of the church about terminology. And I've kind of gone back and forth on it just because it's too difficult often enough to maintain that clear distinction. The church generally, the standing policy of the church, and there's some who contradict this, but the standing practice of the church has been to avoid using the terms, lesbian, gay, bisexual, because they tend to nudge the person into identifying with their desire too much. Like, this defines me. I am gay. No. You are a person. You are a man or a woman. You have these sexual desires, but it's not who you are. I am gay. No, like what? I mean, I am straight. That's not who I am. Mm-hmm. Right. It's a factor. But sexual desire is a part of a very important part. I mean, it's there. It affects a lot of but, like, it does not define me. It's not who I am. And so, like, the pastoral policy for the longest time and still on the books is to avoid using those terms. And the only exception being, like, when you're in a conversation with someone where, like, making that distinction is not helpful. or you kind of meet people where they are, and like, you gotta deal with the language they're using. There's a certain amount of give and take with that, and you just kind of like roll with it. And so like often enough, for the sake of sheer convenience, leaders in the church will just go ahead and use those terms because people know what they mean. Whereas when I say same-sex attraction, it doesn't always come across. Or when I say SSA, the abbreviation. But that's the church's preferred way of speaking of it. A person with same-sex attraction. You're a person who has this desire.
Got you.
And so, yeah, the LGBT movement, the pride movement, organizations that say like, you need to come out and own who you are. Our whole point is like, yeah, we want you to own who you are. We just want you to realize like your sexual desire is not who you are. It's what you have. And we don't want to trivialize that. And like, when someone comes to confession to me and confesses, homosexual behavior, like I don't bat an eye. Like, okay, let's talk about like how we're going to resist that.
Right.
Same when, all the time I hear confessions about pornography and masturbation of both sides. And like, I'm going to treat them both as lust. And in neither case, I'm going to go, you need to come out and just own the fact that you're a porn watcher. It's what you are. And no, it's not.
Right.
No.
And if you want to push this envelope, you want to push this envelope even further to make the point. Someone who is sexually attracted to children, right, does not have to be a pedophile. They do not have to act on that. It is possible for someone to experience that desire and hate it and resist it and live a good life and prudently avoid putting themselves in situations where that becomes a problem. I don't want to put that person in a box any more than I want to put a straight person or a gay person in a box. It's like straight, gay, pedophile, like we're human beings with sexual desires, and some are disordered. All of them are disordered to some extent, and they're disordered in different ways, some more seriously than others. But the point is, disordered sexual desire is disordered sexual desire, and none of them define us. We are persons who make decisions. Our desires are influences, but they should not be the deciding factor. And so that compassion goes to the straight guy addicted to porn, to the gay guy with his lover, to the pedophile who has never, ever touched a child and hates the idea of it, but honestly has to face the fact that those images fly into his head without us asking for it. And he wants help to get away from it. I don't want someone to be afraid to come to confession and be like, I was sexually attracted to that child and I don't want to act on it. Help me. And I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about prayer and penance and support to not fall into that sin. Because it doesn't define you.
Absolutely.
And I don't, you could probably tell I feel passionate, but like I really do love and feel compassion for these people. And like I have had people cry in front of me in confession because they were so afraid to admit their same-sex attraction to me. And I was like, I'm sorry that you felt so afraid, and that this has turned into some kind of self-hatred. I don't want that. I don't hate you, and no one should.
Amen to that.
And I want to free you from the slavery of like, I'm in this box and I either act on it or I die in misery and go to hell. There's a much better option, which is I live chastely with the help of God. Yeah. So like this, and that the path of redemption, like, and that they need friendship, they need accompaniment, they need acceptance, they need patience.
Which may I share that? And to live chastely, I mean, the Catholic Church even teaches husband and wife do the same thing. If you don't want kids, live a chaste life, and practice natural family planning and all this stuff is not.
Well, but it's also not, you're supposed to be open to life, correct? Am I correct?
Not.
Well, so okay. Well, NFP is a whole different conversation. We'll get back to that some other time. But the chastity applies to married couples. Chastity applies to everyone. I mean, It freaks people out when John Paul II in Paris said that it's possible for a man and wife to lust for each other, and that's sinful. They were like, "How's that possible? They're married. It should be okay." No, like lusting for your wife is not okay. No, there is appropriate sexual desire and behavior with your wife, and by all means, married couples go ahead. But there is such a thing as objectifying your wife. Just because she's married to you doesn't mean you can treat her like an object now.
Right.
Lust ruins marriages.
Yeah.
Even when it's lust for the people in the marriage. And so like at the end of the day, like we're called to chastity, we're called to order our sexual desire to the gift of self and openness to life, right? To proclaim the union of man and wife, which indicates the union of Christ and his church, like in certain ways. Like there's a whole sacramentality tied up with that. And if you aren't doing, then their sexuality is ordered towards self-control, to chastity, to the witness, to the life to come, when genital sexual expression is no longer the norm. Right, which is why priests are celibate. And we priests and religious need to do a better job of like accompanying these people who, because of their desires, feel like, okay, I can't get married because I'm not attracted to the other sex. Oh, how do I live a life without marriage and be happy? I'm like, well, okay, I know, about 400,000 men around the world who try to do that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
The priests and religious can be a witness to that in a certain way. And some of them have same-sex attraction, some of them don't, but they all live chastely, or they're called to. Yeah, so at the end of the day, it boils down to, it was not God did not make you that way. God did not intentionally give you a desire you can't act on. God is allowing the consequences of original sin to play out for all human beings, and they play out in different ways, and some with greater burdens than others. And the greater the burden, the greater the grace, and the greater the glory that comes. The harsher, the greater the crucifixion, the greater the resurrection. We're going to get to heaven and find some, flamboyantly gay people who are actually really holy, because for all their flamboyance, they actually live chastely. We just didn't realize it. We just assumed they were acting on these desires.
Right.
But because they heroically resisted the desire, they're heroically virtuous and glorified in heaven for it. We're going to get to heaven and find people who were gay on earth who are much holier than us.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's a really beautiful way to put it.
And I look forward to seeing that. The first shall be last and last shall be first. Like, Jesus loves those inversions. Don't assume because this person has this struggle, you're better than them, because you don't have it.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and it just comes down to the art of how do we convey that love, and shouting from the rooftops that gay people go to hell certainly isn't the church's way. And always emphasizing the punishment and the damnation, that's just not the way. It's we love you, and because we love you, we're inviting you in. We're trying to persuade you to seeing yourself the way God sees you. And that's hard for all of us. We all struggle with that.
Yeah, I kind of tie in what you're talking about when you say that when they use it as an identity, right? So I am gay versus I have these thoughts, right? And so these countries that if you have those thoughts and openly live with that label, then you are under incredible stress, and you may even be killed for identifying yourself as that, versus it just being, a part of your struggle that you have here on this earthly plane, right?
Right. So, all right, unjust discrimination should be avoided. That's in the catechism. The church is going to be pretty categorical in condemning those countries that throw homosexuals off the roof. Right. First, because homosexuals are not who they are. Right. And throwing people off the roof is not how you help them with disordered desire. And there's a whole debate about how should the civil law handle this, right? When we talk about natural law, but this is focusing on church teaching, and the church's response is we can't call it good. We can't say, oh, that's marriage. It's just, no, it's not. But at the same time, just because we oppose your desire to get married to someone of the same sex doesn't mean we don't want you to be happy. We don't want you to be loved. We want you to be alone. And it's that's just not the frame of reference. The Western world doesn't think that way. They've defined marriage as, I choose to be with you, and the body doesn't matter. And they assume that happiness requires sexual expression, and we don't. And bridging that gap is the difficult part. And it can only be done in relationship. It can only be done in witness. It can only be done in deliberately looking for ways to interact in a loving way with people who have these desires, who are living that lifestyle. You don't go to the gay bar with them and help them pick up other dudes, right? But you play board games and video games with them. You go to dinner. You hang out. You have conversations. You share a beer. You help fix their house when it gets destroyed by a hurricane. You celebrate their birthday. You express interest in their lives, and you even care about their partner, even if you think like what you're doing with your partner is wrong. I still care about him as a human being, and I know you do. Your love for him as a friend is not wrong. Your sexual desire is, but your love for this partner as a human being, someone who accompanies you in life, who shares your interest, who cares about you, those are not evil. It is just that like the original sin has entered in and twisted one small part of that and saying, therefore, you should have sex with this person. Well, no, you don't have to have sex with this person to share your life with them. And the casualty for everybody is because of same-sex attraction. It's much harder for men to have intimate friendships with other men, and for women to have intimate friendships with other women, because they assume they're both are afraid of seeming gay or being gay or whatever. It's like you look at pictures 100 years ago, and dudes are sitting on dudes' laps and walking hand in hand down the street, and they're not gay. And the fact that men are afraid to be physically affectionate with each other is not a good thing. It's okay for men to be physically affectionate. It's not okay for men to be sexually affectionate with other men.
Right.
But there's a hug, it's sitting next to each other, holding hands. Those don't have to be sexual expression. But like our whole culture is like, everyone probably tensed up when I said that. Like, what? Dudes holding hands down the street, and they're not like that's you would automatically assume weird. That. You saw guys holding hands, but there was once upon a time when gay marriage was not such a part of the public consciousness where that wasn't the assumption. And children
hold their hands,
Yeah, little boys are instinctively affectionate with their fathers.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said. I mean, yeah, for that. And there are some cultures where that's probably still the norm. I mean, I think there are cultures European cultures were like, yeah, guys kiss. It's not that weird. And so it's like, but the problem is because we've turned gay into an identity and a lifestyle, people what got blurred out was intimate friendship that's non-sexual. And intimate friendship is the answer for people with same-sex attraction. It's the answer for people who are attracted to the opposite sex and are alone. It's friendship. It's the answer to priests leaving the priesthood. It's the answer to some miserable marriages. Like, yeah, your partner's great, but like you still need friends.
Yeah.
And you need to be friends with each other. Your friendship with your spouse is just as important as your sexual involvement with them. Probably more so, because your friendship will last into heaven. Yeah. Your sexual partnership will not. I mean, the children will.
So we've talked about identity now, and trans completely changes the identity of sexual orientation itself, right?
Yeah. So this is the super complicated one. Because it's such an umbrella thing.
Okay.
Let's see if I can do this in a summary way that's fair. So yes, by scripture, by revelation, the church is going to say there are only two sexes, male and female. You are either one or the other. And the church is going to say it's not possible for a woman's soul to be trapped in a man's body, and vice versa. And but where we enter into all the complexity is their bodies are still under the effects of the fall. And some of the effects of the fall are various forms of mutation. And some of the mutations are men with feminine characteristics and women with masculine characteristics, like even men with ovaries, women with testicles, like this. That happens. It's not super common, but it does happen. There's even crazier. You've heard of chimerism, human chimera, where two embryos in the womb, right? One doesn't make it and is absorbed by the other, and that person lives their whole life with two sets of DNA in their body. Yeah. And depending on where you draw a sample from, you'll get a different result on their DNA. And it can even happen that a woman absorbed their male twin and has male DNA in their body. And so, like, when you introduce all of those biological complications, it can lead to people experiencing confusing signals about what it means to be a man or a woman. And then, I mean, so that at the biological level, right, male and female is the way. I mean, it's the way that the biology is, and intersex or hermaphroditism is a mutation, right? It doesn't break the rule. It's a mutation within the rule. There's still a binary. And then there's the layer of like, how does a culture identify masculinity and femininity. And that's going to vary somewhat culture to culture. There's going to be some common ground across them all. And that's one of the things that, a friend of mine, Dr. Miller, is traveling the world, interviewing people to try and learn. But that doesn't, just because it varies a little bit from culture to culture, doesn't mean there isn't some foundation. And the biological foundation is male or female. But for somebody who is male, but has feminine DNA because they absorbed their twin, it could affect like certain expressions in their body. Someone who's born with that hermaphrodism, it's not always immediately obvious which one is the sex they belong to and what is the mutation on that. And then there's the level of like, maybe they are born male, but they have a deficiency in the receptors of hormones. So their body produces the male hormone, but the receptors don't absorb it. And so they don't properly express the chemical aspect of being man, which affects their psychology and their behavior. It doesn't make them a woman. It means that they're a man whose particular biological struggle lends itself to this. And so the answer there is not to like pretend he's a woman. The answer is to broaden our understanding of man to include all of the falls and difficulties of original sin within that. Like you can be a man who is feminine in body and voice. Feminine, right? Comparatively speaking, because through no fault of your own, the hormones in your body don't work right. So, I mean, you're talking, I mean, there's chromosomes, there's genes, there's hormones, there's the body's response to hormones, there's the culture, there's the psychology, there's the experience, like all of that goes into like how we express ourselves in society. And so the transgender movement in part is right. I want to affirm they're right about something. Too many cultures are overly restrictive in defining the role of a man or a woman in society. And a lot of people, when they say gender, what they have a problem with is not the biology. They have a problem with the society saying a man must be this and a woman must be that. A woman can only and always be a homemaker. And if she does anything else, like she's violating her femininity.
Yeah, we're seeing a
That's
lot
wrong.
of that right now.
That's wrong.
Yeah.
That's not what we believe. I mean, right. And so in as much as the transgender movement is fighting against false stereotypes of masculinity and femininity, they should be commended. But when they go to the level of like pretending the body is not a real part of who the person is, that's this like male and female are constructs. No, male and female are biological realities that are more or less clear depending on the, genetic difficulties you might have had. But it still exists, male or female. The soul is male or female. From the very beginning, God says made in his image, male and female. It's not an accident. It's not a secondary add-on. We're not going to all be like, androgynous spirits in heaven. We get our bodies back as male or female. And so, I mean, the answer there is like, again, a lot of patience, a lot of trying to look for the goodwill and agree, like machismo, right? Toxic masculinity is a thing. Not all masculinity is toxic. But the macho man who takes what he wants and objectifies women, that's a bad stereotype. And we should be against that just as much as transgender are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The dad who doesn't play sports, but does art and poetry and music, and who's slender and teaches his son these things, he's not less of a man.
No way.
Than the bearded, bulky guy who can throw a football 40 yards,
Can you throw a football 40 yards?
I don't think I can. No, I'm terrible. I'm terrible at football, man. Only thing I can do is run. I cannot catch or throw. So like we should be with a lot of these people who are saying it is not fair for you to put men in this box because this box is wrong. But we shouldn't go so far as to say there are no distinctions. There's no difference between men and women in society. That's not true. Men and women are very different, and that is going to affect the roles they play in society. Men have certain tendencies to excel in areas that women don't, and vice versa. Yeah, there are some exceptions, but it's just the reality that like the strongest man is always going to be stronger than the strongest woman. Always. physically speaking. It's just there are women who could beat the heck out of me. I mean, I do CrossFit. I'm telling you, there are some women I can't even compete with, right? But on the like general level, yes, there are certain tendencies of male and female, and those things are a factor, but they should not define all men and all women. Women who have a career and work and run a business, okay? Just because, I mean, it doesn't have to be a masculine trait. Politics doesn't have to be a masculine field, even if it tends to be more attractive to men than to women. We shouldn't bar them because they're male or female. You know, and there are going to be things that men can do and women can't, and vice versa. I always get the question, why can't women be priests? And my immediate answer is, why can't men be mothers?
Oh, wow. That's a great response.
Because there are things that men can do that women can't, and vice versa. The ability to carry life is a feminine trait. And yes, there are people out there who identify as male, who are biologically female and get pregnant and call themselves a pregnant man. Biologically, they're female, right? The XX chromosome is what's at work. The genetics they pass on, they are contributing the female gamete to the process. And for whatever reason, they identify with masculine traits and masculine roles. And the culture has told them that in order to be happy, you have to like call yourself this thing that you're not. And if you want to, I mean, to approach this with charity, because it's also possible that the doctors were wrong at one point. Like if you're dealing with a hermaphrodite or somebody who has chimerism or intersex, and they think that you're a male with, you know, a female mutation, but you're actually not, and you find out later in life and you have to like go back and transition, like that's a theoretical possibility.
Wow.
Because it's not immediately clear for somebody who's intersex. Not always. I mean, again, that's the proper field of science. Mm-hmm. The church is going to say, like, philosophically, theologically, they are either male or female. But the ability to determine that in the present actual case, that's going to require experts in biology. And from what I've researched, it's not always immediately clear that a child who's born intersex is like, okay, they typically are sterile. So like you can't use that test. Like which one can they reproduce with? Well, you don't know. They're typically sterile. Very few exceptions to that. And so they do their best with the least invasive way possible to identify, okay, which one are you primarily and which one is the mutation? Again, it means nothing about the quality of the person. Mutation is just that. It's just mutation. We all have mutations of sorts. Which one is the mutation? It's not always immediately clear. And I guess it's possible that the doctor makes the wrong call, steers this person down the track, and they come to find out with better science down the line, oh, we were wrong. As we better understand your genetic makeup, you're primarily male and we thought you were female. And like now you've lived 10, 15 years which you thought was female, but you're actually male. And now we need to transition you to that. Like that is a possibility. That's not the same thing as the guy who's clearly a boy, grows up, wants to be a girl, and then becomes a girl.
Right.
Right. The guy who, if he were to engage sexual activity with a female, he would produce a child because he's the male contributing the male gamete. He can't ever be a woman. He's never one. He would ever was. He might identify with feminine traits like laundry and homemaking and, you know, crochet or whatever, like, you know, culturally. That doesn't make him a woman. And even style of dress is culturally conditioned.
Yeah.
You know, like to some extent. I mean, obviously there are physical characteristics that are different, but like long flowing dresses, I mean, you know, there are cultures where everybody's wearing a dress. I mean, and pants, I mean, like women shouldn't wear pants. I mean, I don't see how you ground that in anything other than your own culture, which is subjective and changes. And so when transgenders say, like, we got to be careful about putting men and women in boxes, I agree. When they say a man can become a woman, I disagree. And it gets really thorny there. And there's science to back this up. I mean, there's studies that transitioning often does not permanently resolve the psychological, you know, like the idea is like if they don't transition, they might commit suicide. But the studies that I've seen have shown that like doesn't consistently help. more often than just as often, they still have the same tendencies even after they transition. And some, I think Johns Hopkins have gone back, but at one point they stopped offering transition surgeries because they realized it wasn't helping the patient.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And there's a growing movement called detrans, the detransition movement. People who transitioned, all these doctors and psychologists said, oh, this will make you happy, this will make you better. They did it. They lived for a while as the other sex or other gender, or however you want to use those terms, found that it did not make them happy, that it did not help. And then they have to transition back, but now their body is permanently modified. And you can find some pretty intense videos and websites of people who are detransitioned. And they went back. They were a male. They lived as a female for a while, and they went back to acknowledge themselves as a man. But they have breasts. They have other feminine traits. Their voice is permanently changed, and they have a lot of anger. They're angry at society for making them feel unwelcome in their own expression of masculinity and feeling the need to transition. They're angry at the doctors and psychologists who went along with it despite the harm that it could have done. And some do come to the conclusion, like they recognize what the church is trying to offer, and they say, I'm glad that you spoke the truth to me, and now I can live in that. But a lot of them are still in that place of anger. Like, I transitioned because society told me men aren't like me, therefore I must not be a man. Come to find out, society's wrong. I could be a man in my own way. Yeah. And so we should have nothing but sympathy and compassion for those people because they're victims of society. Yeah. And unfortunately, they think the voice of the church is on that same side, that the church is saying, if you're a man, you have to be X, Y, and Z. In reality, the only thing the church says about men is that you can be a father. And that, you're called to live a life of love and sacrifice after Christ himself. And whether that's through artistry and poetry and pottery or through building things.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Interpretive dance, like male ballerinas don't have to be, feminine. They could be pretty masculine, and so like, and I think that's the key. Like, what is the church's offer of that? It's like to help them understand, like, why do I not feel comfortable in my own body? That's a nightmare. I can't imagine. I have a male body and I don't feel like a man. I can't imagine the suffering that is. We should have compassion on that. Why do they feel that way? Is it a result of some biological mishap somewhere? That's the result of original sin, and it's a cross they carry. Is that the result of society falsely labeling them? That's something we should work to change.
Now, is that what some don't identify at all with any sex? Right?
Yeah, probably so.
Okay.
Gender fluid, or and like, and so I think the way part of it is what I want to be able to do is just jettison all the terminology and start from this foundation. A healthy sense of self is rooted in reality. A healthy sense of self is rooted in reality. The reality is I am biologically male, so my sense of self should deal with that.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean for my role in culture? I mean, there's a million. You can't answer those questions in the hypothetical. You can only answer them in the concrete, and that takes patience and prudence and trial and error in some ways. But like, a healthy sense of self should be rooted in reality. I am biologically male. I'm biologically male with mutations to give me female characteristics. You got to deal with that. Your sense of self has to address that, and how you sort through that. Like, okay, so I'm biologically male.
Raised by my mother, and I had just a sister, so it was like me with two females in the house for most of my life, and I tend to pick up some of their feminine characteristics. So throughout some of middle school and high school, people observed that, and then some name calling and picking came and all this other stuff. But also, I already have like a rather extravagant personality. I'm loud, I'm out there and stuff like that. So that also, I didn't have the deep voice back then either.
Right.
So
right.
I love that you're saying this whole societal thing, because based off of what I'm seeing from you, it doesn't match within my frame of mind. And so, people are put in these boxes, and And I can understand and see how some people might sit in that box and own it because people push them in there so much. Because I definitely experienced that just from the judgment and hatred or hate that people could share.
Right. And to realize that, like, just because they fit the box well doesn't mean that they have a healthy sense of, like, the guy who really is big and bulky and masculine and fits all the stereotypes, he doesn't have a healthy sense of self either, because he's still rooted in false stereotypes. He doesn't have a deep understanding of his identity rooted in relationship with God.
That's a good point.
Very true.
With the like, and so, like, his own machismo can get in the way of being an authentic man. Just because he happens to be big and bulky and strong and deep voice and whatever, outgoing and all that, like, I mean, that's gonna bar him from, like, true sense of identity. It's got to be rooted in reality, and the deepest reality, of course, as Catholics, we understand at the center of every soul, the image of God, right, which is imperfectly expressed in our broken world, and that imperfection can be expressed in a body that is male but has mutations of female characteristics, or vice versa. That imperfection expression of my image of God can be expressed in sexual desires that are not well ordered. Like, I'm sexually attracted to the same sex and I shouldn't be. But, like, the should doesn't mean I'm at fault. It's like, so how do I get beyond the limitations of the fall to my identity in Christ, who created me with an original design and has a plan for a redemption that restores and uplifts that original design? And getting people through that journey is more important than being right in the moment.
Oh yeah.
We've had you for 1 hour, 20 minutes so far. So thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. What I want to say is, we're saying this, and we understand the truth of church. I understand it way more. And I definitely had some issues with my understanding. But now saying this and saying that if you have this, you can still live with this. You can still a chaste life, but also a faithful life. But on the other side of the coin, there's still individuals who say, let me say this appropriately, that basically we aren't allowing people to be who they are. But then again, that's exactly, it's a big circle. It's basically, like you said, society coming back and they put an emphasis on what they believe is happy, what our idea of happiness is, whether it be money, things, and all this stuff in life.
Sense of self he's talking about.
Well, I think that even in today's society, like you said, it's LGBTQIA plus now, right? So, LGBT, and it keeps adding. So that shows you secular society and what's happening. It's a big thing now. So the pressure to even getting to that area, and now consider people who are growing up and don't have people necessarily that are close friends and family. And they acknowledge that if they become part of this group, then potentially they already have a massive amount of people that are ready to be their friends completely.
Absolutely.
And so, that in itself, I imagine, would be enticing.
I mean, it's possible they grow up in a Catholic family, and because they're dealing with these issues and the Catholic family doesn't have the formation understanding, right, they find themselves driven towards suicide. And then they step out and embrace this identity, this whole subculture that's ready to, like, and they find real relief, and it really does help them. And in a certain extent, it saves their life. But at the end of the day, it's replacing one error with another, maybe one we're more comfortable with. But if we're going to get to the full truth there, we're going to get to something that lasts even beyond this life. Like, we've got to go to the source. And at the end of the day, it boils down to, like, what is everybody wants them to be their true selves and have real freedom. And either real freedom is found in the world's idea, like, there is no God. Your real freedom is found in doing what you think is right and just following that. And, like, it's tied up with relativism and following your desires and pleasure and all these things. Or it's rooted in God and his design for you, which has an original design, which is obscured by the fall and which can be redeemed, which requires grace and the cross to get to. And it's how do we convince people to see that the truth that you want, the freedom you desire, that's a good desire. But the freedom you want is not found in embracing these desires and these ideas, but it's found in embracing your identity as a child of God.
That's the perfect words to end on. So I haven't said this in a while, but after every show, we go back and watch it because we're so in tune with listening and having the conversation that we miss some things.
This is going to be it's a treasure to have your insight and your compassion to share and be able to pass on to anyone who might, be interested.
I mean, this tonight for me has been an ongoing struggle ever since we talked, Father Albert, and you asked if I had any topics, and I said, well, do you have any that you would like to? Because I always let the Holy Spirit do its work. And whenever you responded LGBT, I was just like, oh Lord, oh man, because it's a tough one.
It's a tough thing.
But and people so easily throw out judgment and all this stuff, but I love all people. And I on the journey for truth, in the sense, in no way have spoken out or done anything in the sense of trying to place labels, which is like what you're even saying. It's like we should not place those labels. And I'm not saying that people are doing wrong by carrying the cross that they were given, right? It's just, I think the biggest part, and you said it perfectly in your last statement, is the fact that people will struggle, and unfortunately, society for the most part is against you in the scheme of carrying your cross. If you have any of these, have any thoughts or desires,
right?
You took a really hard topic and you just made it so easy. I think for me, I mean, it was.
Well, and a lot of Catholics have at least some sense of the framework to understand this, and I'm sure there are times I've misspoken or was less than clear, or like it was harder to hear for some people. And I always encourage, like, the best way through this is direct personal encounter with other people of goodwill. Like, if the person's going to come and attack, it's not going to work either way. Like, if the person's going to come say, like, it's got to start with, I am willing to try to see the world from your eyes, and then present my truth in a way that makes sense to you, so that we can bridge my world and your world and hopefully come together on the truth, which is probably a little different than both of our worlds. So,
absolutely. Well, Father, everybody's telling you thank you as well, because they all agree and enjoyed everything that you had to share with us. What I'm most excited about is the fact that I think I might have gotten you on the Holy Trivia team for Lafayette.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I'll do what I can.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to send a message to you three, and then y'all can help me get the other two people, because I'm thinking 5 priests on one team would be perfect. So I think I might have 3, unless Father Brian's going to sit out one, and then you get some more people. But most important, again, I appreciate your time tonight. I just can't tell you thank you enough for your sacrifice. I say every episode that we have a priest that you're my hero, and you truly are. Like, I'm a huge Marvel fan, but it's where you have Jesus sitting there and saying, that's how I saved the world. And truly, to know that you gentlemen are Jesus on earth when you serve its people through confession and the Mass. It's such a beautiful thing. So thank you for being my hero. Thank you for being a priest of the Catholic Church. And thank you for shepherding his flock tonight.
I'll try. By prayer and grace only.
Yeah, prayer and grace and education. And that's what we're doing at Removing the Rest. We are learning the truth of Catholicism. So we will continue to remove the rest